All right, guys, so we are going to write notes on angles, parallel lines, and the transversal. And if I ever spell something wrong, just let me know. Sometimes I write too fast and I misspell things. And then sometimes, let's be honest, I really don't know how to spell something and then I just spell it really bad. Or really badly, really poorly. All right, so we learned about 3 types of angles yesterday, or we reviewed 3 types of angles. We learned about acute angles, we learned about right angles, and we learned about obtuse angles. You guys know that acute angles are actually less than 90 degrees. So go ahead and write less than 90 degrees. Right angles are exactly 90 degrees. So exactly 90 degrees, not more, not less. Obtuse is greater than 90 degrees. And if we were going to draw a picture to represent these, acute angles are cute little angles, right? So we're going to say that that's like 30 degrees. That's an example. A right angle is a beautiful lined up corner that is often represented by this little box. That means 90 degrees. And lastly, the obtuse angle is like an extended or it almost looks like a line, but it's not a line. So we could even say that this is like 179 degrees. It's not 179 degrees. 179 degrees would look like a line. So we're going to say that it's 159 degrees. Basically, it's anything greater than 90 degrees. Okay? And sorry for the noise. I am recording in a class right now. And all those noises in the background, once you guys hear the recording, is when students are in the waiting room and I approve them, so on and so forth. That's what I hear as a teacher, so that I don't leave people in the waiting room the whole period. Okay, so we learned about those angles. We also reviewed vertical angles and adjacent angles. And then if at any point, if I'm going too fast, just tell me to pause in the chat. Just say pause if I'm going too fast. Okay? So let's do adjacent angles and vertical angles. Adjacent and vertical. And I'm going to try to write neater because I always regret after watching these videos when I'm done recording how poor my writing looks. How you guys are able to understand my writing is beyond me. Thank you for not criticizing my writing as much as you could. So adjacent angles are angles that share a vertex and share a side. So let's go ahead and write that. So adjacent angles, they share a vertex and they share a side. So if I were going to represent adjacent angles, it would look something like this. Like let's say we have, okay, so adjacent angles, if I were representing it, it would look something like this. So angle ACD is adjacent to angle DCE. Do you see how both of them share a vertex? They both share the vertex C, and they both share this side CD. So look, ACD is adjacent to DCE because they both share this yellow side and this common vertex. So those are adjacent angles. They're right next to each other. They're not across from each other. They're not perpendicular. They're or parallel. They're right next to each other. So in a way, they could be perpendicular to each other. If you know the definition of perpendicular, that means that there's just two lines that cross perfectly and make four 90-degree angles. I guess we could say that adjacent angles can be perpendicular. We're going to talk about that as well at the end. So now that we reviewed adjacent angles, let's review what vertical angles are. I used to love when I was in school when teachers would do these dotted lines. I don't know why, it was just so satisfying to do these dotted lines perfectly straight. Every time I do them as a teacher, I'm like, cool, now I'm the one that's making these. Just little nerdy things that I remember from being a student that I appreciated. Okay, man, it doesn't delete. Sometimes, there we go. Vertical angles. All right, so vertical angles, they're like across from each other. So they're across from each other. And they're also, they're made when two lines intersect. So I guess like we could say intersection of two lines. So it could look something like this. An intersection of two lines. So we're going to say that this is angle A. This is angle B. And then we're going to say that this is angle C. And this is angle D. And I always forget to put like a little tick. This is what we use in geometry to determine if there are similar angles to each other. So A and B, those angles are the same, they're congruent in measure. And then angle C and D, they're also congruent. Does anyone remember what congruent means in geometry? Congruent is a fancy way of just saying the same or equal. Good. Thank you guys for telling me in the chat. Okay, so angle A and angle B are vertical angles, which means that they're congruent. Congruent, yes. So if I told you B is 40 degrees, that means that angle A is also 40 degrees. So that means angle A equals 40 degrees because angle B is 40 degrees. Angle A is 40 degrees because angle B is 40 degrees. It's hard to see this, but I put B equals 40 degrees. So let me rewrite it. So now I want you guys to figure out what is angle C and angle D equal to. Do you guys notice that this is a straight line, this line? We're going to call that line M, okay? Let's call that line M. And let's call this line P. So line M is 180 degrees, right? Every line is 180 degrees. So this line, I'm going to write it in purple. This line, the angles above it have to add up to equal 180. And the angles underneath that purple line have to equal 180. They have to add up to 180. Because by definition, the lines are all equal to 180 degrees. If it's not a line, it's not equal to 180 degrees. So line P is also 180 degrees. So anyways, if this line is 180 degrees and the angles above it have to add up to equal to 180 degrees, 180 minus 40 will tell you what angle C is. So what's 180 minus 40? 140. So that means that angle C equals 140. Because angle C and angle B have to add up to equal 180. Because they're above that line, that purple line of line M. Now here's the cool thing. If angle C is equal to 140 degrees, what does angle D have to equal? What is angle D? Those are vertical angles. So C has to equal D. So D is also 140 degrees. So by property of vertical angles, if they just give you 4 angles, right? And they just give you 1 degree measure, you can figure out the other 3 missing angles just by knowing one piece. And in this case, we only knew one piece, 40 degrees. Then we were able to figure out, okay, well, A is vertical to B, so A also is 40 degrees. This and this have to equal to 180, and then that's vertical to this. So do you see how we figured out 3 missing angles just by one piece of information? That's boss. Vertical angles, these are like your best friend, okay? These are awesome. Put a heart next to it. Thank you, vertical angles. You don't have to put a heart next to it. I just get really excited when I see vertical angles because I know that it's going to be easy for me to figure out. So we have complementary angles and supplementary angles. And I know for a fact I'm spelling complementary and supplementary right because I've practiced these words. So I don't want to write down complementary and supplementary every time I think of it in the notes. So we're going to abbreviate this. We're going to write comp whenever I write complementary angles, and I'm going to write sup for supplementary. Okay? You guys will have to know the difference. Complementary, supplementary. Complementary angles are 2 angles that add up to 90 degrees. Complementary angles add up to 90 degrees. That's the key word. So if complementary angles add up to 90 degrees, what do you think supplementary angles add up to be? Supplementary angles, I should have only put 1 P, but that's fine. Supplementary angles are 2 angles that add up to 180 degrees. So one adds up to 90 degrees and the other adds up to 180 degrees. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to write complementary angles and supplementary angles. All right, so I'm going to move this up. Hopefully it doesn't mess up my notes. Okay. So an example of complementary angles, we know that angles that add up to 90 degrees, we know that 90 degrees is a right angle. So we know it's going to be a corner. So complementary angles are like corners. Complementary corners, 90 degrees. They have to be 2 angles that add up to 90 degrees. Actually, I want this line to be here in the middle. So let's pretend that this angle is like angle, we're going to say that this is X, Y, Z, and W. So let's say that this angle, X, Y, Z, is 45 degrees. And that Z, Y, W is also 45 degrees. 45 plus 45, if you didn't know that, is 90 degrees. So we would say at this point that angle XYZ and angle ZYW, we would say that they're adjacent, but we would also say that they're complementary because they add up to be 90 degrees. So those angles are complementary, or we're just going to put comp. So supplementary angles are angles that add up to 180. And you know, what's equal to 180 in math? Well, a line. A line is 180 degrees, right? A line. So you could have an angle that looks like this. Two angles. You can also have an angle that looks like, oops, sorry. For those of you who didn't get to see that, it's here. You can have an angle that looks like this. You can have an angle that looks like this, where they have 90 and 90. 90 plus 90 is 180. You can have an angle that looks like, or two angles that look like this. Look, teeny tiny. Right? There's two angles. But let's just make it easy for us. Let's have an angle that looks like this. Okay? So let's call these P, Q, R, and S. And let's say that they gave us this information right here. This angle is, I don't know, like 35 degrees. 35 degrees. The angle adjacent to that, or the angle that's supplementary to 35 degrees, would have to add up to equal 180. And thank you for putting it in the chat, because honestly, my brain has stopped working for a second. Yeah. So 145 plus 35. Check it on the side. 145 plus 35. Carry the 1. Yay, that adds up to 180. Yes. So angle PQR and angle RQS are supplementary angles. Oh, I should have put the word angles over here too. Cool. All right, guys, so I decided that instead of continuing on this video, we're going to do a different video, but it's going to be the same notes. So the first thing we learned about are angles, acute angles. Acute angles are less than 90 degrees. An example of an acute angle is this 30-degree angle. An example of a right angle, it looks like a corner of a rectangle or a square or a box. So a right angle is exactly 90 degrees. An obtuse angle is greater than 90 degrees. So anything greater than 90, but less than 180 degrees, because 180 degrees is a line. If you guys didn't know that, or you have some room, why don't you put a line and then write 180 degrees? That's a line. That's not an angle, that's a line, right? Okay, and then we also learned about adjacent and vertical angles. Adjacent angles are angles that share a vertex and a side. So adjacent angles are angles that are right next to each other when they share a little point, which is a vertex, and they share a side. They're angles that are side by side, adjacent angles. Vertical angles are angles that are across from each other. They're congruent, and another way to say congruent is equal. But angle A and angle B are across from each other. They're congruent in value. Same with C and D. Those are congruent in value. Those are vertical angles. Vertical angles are formed when there are two intersections of lines, or two lines that intersect. That's when you get two pairs of vertical angles. You get pair A and B and pair C and D. Then we also learned about complementary and supplementary angles. Complementary angles are angles that add up to 90 degrees. Supplementary angles are angles that add up to 180 degrees.